Canada and the U.S. have always historically had a very strong relationship. Canadians recently are feeling that the relationship is not as good as it used to be. Is there a way to fix that?
Well, I had an easier job than Mr. Trudeau, because I dealt with President Reagan and President Bush and President Clinton. Those were my interlocutors. And all three of them were great gentlemen, and they knew Canada and they loved Canada. So it made it easier for me.
But is there a way to fix it now?
Yeah, I think so. These things, you know, the hostility, I guess I could call it that we saw between the President and the Prime Minister will dissipate in the fullness of time. And our Prime Minister will have an occasion to reestablish the relationship on a basis that it ought to be. So you need a congenial type in the White House to help you along. I had that, and I can't say that that's always the case these days. So that's why I sympathize with Justin, with the Prime Minister, that he has a tougher challenge than some of us had.
Well, you were so integral in the signing of the original NAFTA agreement, and on Friday, Justin Trudeau added his signature along with the President of Mexico and the U.S. President to the new deal, NAFTA 2, we can call it. There are people who are saying, even though in advance of this he urged the U.S. President to remove the tariffs on aluminum and steel, that he should not have signed until that was done.
That's wrong. He did what he should do. He signed the deal. We'll get rid of the tariffs. They'll come off. In fact, I'm sure he's working on them down there in Buenos Aires. But look, Sandie, what is NAFTA? What does it govern NAFTA 2 today? I'll tell you, 500 million people, with 7% of the world's population generating 28% of the world's wealth, that creates tens of millions of jobs, tens and tens of millions of jobs for our three countries. $1.2 trillion a year in trade among our three countries, which is the largest and richest trade arrangement in the history of the world. When somebody gives you a document that you agree with and says, this is NAFTA, you sign. This is a good deal for Canada. Could it be better? Sure. And did he give up something? Sure he did. But so did the Americans.
So much of what goes on, I mean, we come to you as the elder statesman representing Canada, and in the past it would have been George Bush Sr. Who's going to assume that role now that he's gone?
Well, I think he was, George was pretty unique. You know, Sandie, when you consider his bona fides for the position, he was a genuine war hero. He was a congressman. He was the ambassador to the United Nations, the ambassador to China, chairman of the Republican Party, director of the CIA, vice president of the United States, president of the United States, whose son became a two-term president of the United States.
Pretty impressive.
This is pretty impressive. But moreover, it was enveloped in an atmosphere of kindness. There was no malice. There was no malice in George Bush. He got along with everybody. He never spoke ill of anybody. I'd have to press him sometimes to tell me something negative. I said, in Canada, you've got to have a list of negatives. Not a bit. He always looked for the brighter side of people. And he was a very kind fellow. And I think that is why he inspired such affection universally and such respect among Americans. I don't know who will replace him, because he was uniquely qualified for that role, that honor.
How did the two of you go from being political friends to friends?
Well, I think it developed in the course of when he was defeated in '92. I was still in office. And in fact, he invited Mila and me and all the kids down to Camp David for the final weekend of his presidency. So we just kept on. We just kept on. I'd call him and he'd call me, and we'd visit together, we'd go fishing together and so on. And Barbara and Mila would do book tours and that kind of stuff. And so it just maintained the relationship to where we went from being, I guess, political friends to genuine friends. That's been now 30 years.
You and the late president go back a long way, and I know you're going to be eulogizing him at his funeral. What are your fondest memories?
My fondest memory, Sandie, is what a gentleman he was. A lot of fun. It made it easy for me because he loved Canada. He understood the country, wanted to help us, and did in many major areas. So I remember him with great affection and respect.
His funeral will be held next week. Have you thought yet about, I know it's a big speech that you're going to give, but have you thought yet about how you're going to start it?
Well, he gave me a heads up, as I think I mentioned to you. He called me about 3 years ago and said he wanted me to speak at his funeral. And I told him no, that I don't even want to talk about this, George. And he said, well, you have to, because I've got to get this done. So I said, okay, and so eventually I started to work on something. So I have a little of it done, but I do know how I'm going to start and how I'm going to end.
Can you share?
No. I may change it.
Okay. Prime Minister, thank you.
Thank you, Sandie.